Ideals of the French Revolution. Alexis de Tocqueville, in his The Ancien Regime and the Revolution, argues that the joint pursuit of absolute liberty and equality in pre-revolutionary and revolutionary France was impossible, yet this impossibility went unrecognized. If one takes the idea of uncompromising pursuit of multiple ideals, or almost any single ideal for that matter, to its logical conclusion, one realizes that such action is impossible. If a society at once pursued absolute liberty and equality, it would not be able to resolve whether it should redistribute privately owned land, for example. To redistribute land is to affirm equality but deny liberty. Not to redistribute land is to affirm liberty but deny equality. And there would be many other similarly irreconcilable instances of conflict. The forces that drove the pursuit of these mutually exclusive principles were as follows. Firstly, the philosophy of the 18th century argued for civil and political reform in a manner that furthered liberty and equality. Secondly, the Ancien regime's taxation policies exploited the poor and made them desirous of equal treatment under the law. Finally, public opinion largely aimed at governmental reform in accordance with abstract theoretical principles which emphasized liberty and equality, rather than principles that had been proven in practice. The following excerpts are illustrative of the philosophical influences on pre-revolutionary France. There were two prevailing systems of thought. One division or system contained all the newer revived opinions with reference to the conditions of society and the principles of civil and political law. Such were, for example, the doctrines of the natural equality of man, the consequent abolition of all caste, class, or professional privileges, popular sovereignty, the paramount authority of the social body, the uniformity of rules. The other system's leaders attacked the church with absolute fury. They assailed its clergy, its hierarchy, its institutions, its doctrines. To overthrow these, they tried to tear up Christianity by the roots. Obviously, the former system popularized notions of equality, which appealed to France's poor agricultural class, who, even after the decline of feudalism, experienced social immobility. Proponents of the latter system, on the other hand, were upset with Christianity as an institution because they felt that it wielded undeserved power. These two systems combined to undermine social hierarchies and class distinctions in favor of equal treatment of all men under the government. France's inequitable system of taxation further served to motivate reform toward equality. The following quotes demonstrate the inequity of France's taxation regime. The first condition of the tax being its imposition, not on those who could afford to pay it, but on those who could not afford to resist it. Government was driven into the monstrous anomaly of sparing the rich and burdening the poor. Similarly, it is notorious that the increase of the taille, tenfold in 2 centuries, fell wholly on the agricultural classes. These policies were not just unfair, they were impracticable. The French government had to make many allowances for insolvency on the part of the agricultural class because their tax demands were impossible for the impoverished peasants to meet. As alluded to in the first quote, the French government faced political pressures not to tax the rich, because the rich, with their greater representation in government, could collectively exercise tremendous political influence. So taxation fell largely on the poor, which stirred in them a craving for fairness and equality. A movement toward reform in accordance with prevailing abstract civil and political principles similarly emphasized pursuit of equality as well as pursuit of liberty. This generated tension between these ideals because, absent real-world demonstration of the impossibility of their simultaneous pursuit, the average Frenchman imagined that absolute liberty was compatible with absolute equality. Tocqueville elaborates on this point here. In the absence of free institutions and, consequently, of political classes, active political bodies, or organized parties, the duty of leading public opinion, when it revived, naturally fell to the lot of philosophers. Hence, it might be expected that the revolution would be conducted less in view of specific facts than in conformity with abstract principles and general theories. Furthermore, in France, the political world was divided into two separate provinces without intercourse with each other. One administered the government, the other enunciated the principles on which government ought to rest. The former adopted measures according to precedent and routine, the latter evolved general laws without ever thinking how they could be applied. The one conducted business, the other directed minds. This is analogous to the divide between empiricism and rationalism. Empiricism advocates the acquisition of knowledge through systematic observation and experience, whereas rationalism advocates reasoning from indubitable first principles. Similarly, government officials of pre-revolutionary and revolutionary France may be seen as empiricists, operating by what had worked in practice, while political writers and philosophers of the time may be seen as rationalists, reasoning from first principles or running through thought experiments. It should have been impossible for such writers or philosophers to have concluded that the simultaneous pursuit of absolute liberty and equality was possible. Perhaps they didn't. I believe it's more likely that the average Frenchman found himself in the midst of these two competing ideals and assumed that they were compatible. In conclusion, Tocqueville believes that the simultaneous pursuit of liberty and equality was impossible in pre-revolutionary and revolutionary France. The forces behind this tension are the philosophy of the 18th century, France's inequitable taxation regime, and a spirit of reform advocating pursuit of abstract principles rather than those proven experientially.